Shalom, shalom. Welcome to part 2 of the 2016 Pesach special here on Scroll to Scroll. Okay, so we wrapped up part 1, and I'm sure you guys have see that I'm taking a bit of a different approach this year. You know, I'm coming at this where I know you guys know the story. We've gone over it in terms of the deliverance of the Israelites from Egypt. We're going to be getting plenty into the details of that actual deliverance a little later, as opposed to doing it up front, because I know, one, you already know it, and two, I wanted to focus on certain aspects that I thought would be helpful that are not usually taught. So this is one of those teachings, as was the timeline and the little bit of quasi Q&A material we went over in part 1. And as I mentioned, as we closed part 1, we have a bit of a shocking title, considering we're Hebrew roots, Nazarenes, however you want to put it, how the Christians are right and the rabbis are wrong about 2016. And this is kind of surprising, okay? So, like many things that, that happened in my life, this is inspired by a conversation, a point that my wife Jay brought up. You know, she goes through a lot of correspondence and does a lot of the administrative aspects of the ministry. I focus, of course, on the research and the films and all of that. And this was a few days ago, and she asked me a very interesting question. And I'm just paraphrasing here. I never quite get the full force of the way she originally phrased it right. But the gist of it was, she goes, Andrew, it seems like every year Pesach comes very close to the Christian Easter, but this year Rabbinic Pesach is not only off from your calendar, it's a month off from when the Christians are doing Easter. Why? I told my wife that in one of the most ironic twists in calendar history, the Christian zeal to get away from anything rabbinic led them to in effect rediscover the original Torah-based mechanism that the rabbis themselves abandoned, which actually ends up being more Jewish than the rabbinic stuff they were trying to put behind, and that preceded the rabbinic calendar, which is the calendar of the Middle Ages, basically. Now, how did that work? Here's the story. As we talked about fairly often, Gentile Christians throughout the Persian-controlled East and the Roman-controlled West often kept Torah feasts. There is some debate as to if they kept all of them or when did they keep some and when did they keep others. But there's really no doubt that up to the 4th century there is a large body of Gentile Christians who are keeping Shabbat, Friday night to Saturday night, and Pesach. That much we can definitely attest to, okay? And they kept Pesach in a particularly interesting way. They kept it and used the Sunday of Pesach week to remember the resurrection. The problem, meaning from the Roman Church's viewpoint, of course, was that they had to use the rabbinic calendar to tell them how to find Pesach, so that then they could find the Sunday in Pesach week, Easter, from their view. Now, I don't use the word Easter personally. I'm just saying historically what they used. Many of us in Hebrew roots don't have a name for that Resurrection Sunday at all, or Resurrection Saturday night, or however you're doing it. In the Middle East, the Aramaic Christians call it Kiyamta Damaran, the resurrection of our Master. And I like saying Kiyamta Damaran instead of Easter. Okay, so, but the fact that the idea that Christians would be beholden to Jews to tell them where their most set-apart day of the year is, that did not sit well with large groups of anti-Semitic leadership in the early centuries of the faith. They kicked up a huge protest about this. And this went on, and I'm going to show you how far back this goes, and this might be surprising to you. There was a disciple of the Apostle John, Yohanan, right? And his name was Polycarp, okay? Now, Polycarp, we have got historical accounts about him that indicate that he was being pressured to stop keeping those Jewish feasts. Polycarp's martyrdom is also one of the most famous and moving events in the entire history of the Church Father Roman period. And this was recorded about now Polycarp, he lives, I think, I have to look it up, but I think it's like into the 130s or something like that, or later. And so the Church Father Irenaeus, and I never know if I'm pronouncing that right, he's writing within 50 years of Polycarp's death. Okay? And this is what Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyon, which is in Gaul or France, this is what Irenaeus says in about 180 CE. He says, notwithstanding this, those who did not keep the feast in this way were peacefully disposed towards those who came to them from other dioceses in which it was so observed, although such an observance was felt in more decided contrariety as presented to those who did not fall in with it. And none were ever cast out of the church for this matter. On the contrary, those presbyters who preceded you and who did not observe this custom sent the Eucharist to those of the other dioceses who did not observe it. And when the blessed Polycarp, it's coming to the interesting part, there's a lot of churchy, fluffy, even in English this comes across like that. Polycarp was sojourning in Rome in the time of Anicetus, that's the Bishop of Rome. Although a slight controversy has arisen among them as to certain other points, they were at once well inclined towards each other with regard to the matter at hand, not willing that any quarrel should arise between them upon this head. Neither could Anicetus, the Bishop of Rome, persuade Polycarp not to observe what he had always observed with John, the disciple of our Lord, and other apostles whom he had associated. Neither could Polycarp persuade Anicetus to observe it, as he said that he ought to follow the customs of the presbyters. So here is Polycarp saying, I'm doing the feast. I learned it from Yochanan. Yochanan learned it from Yeshua. And here is the Bishop of Rome having the chutzpah to say to Polycarp, who's practically a witness to the apostolic age, right? To say to Polycarp, no, you should follow the traditions of the Gentile presbyters instead of the apostles. Really? Unbelievable. That's the letter to the Bishop of Rome quoted in Eusebius chapter 4. So here we got a late 2nd century witness acknowledged Polycarp actually has the original apostolic practice, which includes feast keeping. Includes keeping Pesach, at the very least. And as more time passed, the position of Anicetus, the guy who said, no, don't keep those feasts, follow the tradition of the second generation Gentiles, right, became more prevalent. But here's the thing. It never got so popular to the point that the feast-keeping groups were expunged from the ranks of the Roman Church. That's kind of surprising, isn't it? Then, when various diplomatic efforts failed to get rid of the feast-keeping, Rome turned dark, as it often does, and decided to give the movement of the feast-keepers a heretical name. They called them the Quartodecimans. That's Latin for the number 14, as in the 14th of Abib. Well, at least they know the timing, right? Apparently, a great deal of Christians are still doing the Jewish practice of Pesach, starting on as the 14th is going to the 15th. And Quartodeciman became attached to what the church viewed as heretics. The heretics being those dreadful people who dare decide to be obedient to Father Yah's word. So they thought that by giving them like a heretical name, threatening them and all this sort of stuff, that would do it. That would basically, people say, it's not worth it. We don't want to make the Pope angry. Didn't work. At least not completely. Right? It didn't stop the Christian feast keepers. The Gentile, Christian, Pesach loving people. Okay? So when that didn't work, when the shaming or the threat of heresy or excommunication didn't work, Constantine decided to take it up the next notch. And there's a really interesting parallel between the way Constantine progressively gets meaner and the way Hitler got meaner, towards the way that he treated the Jews. First, destroy the property, pass certain laws that they can't hold office, they can't own land, they can't run a business, and so on, and then progress in a straight shot to death camps. And Constantine pretty much follows the same pattern. Okay, maybe it's not exactly the same in terms of the degree and all of that, but it is similar. And Constantine issued something called the Edict of Milan in the year 313 CE. Now, when a lot of Christians read the Edict of Milan, they think it's a good thing. They go, look, we've got more protections because Rome had been persecuting them. They've been killing Christians. And so the Edict of Milan said, no, we're not going to kill you anymore. We're not going to even persecute you for being Christians. We're granting you toleration. And if in the past you had property that was confiscated under Roman persecution, the Edict of Milan said they have to give it back to you. Right? And they got to compensate you really, really well for the land and whatever was taken from you. Okay? But here's the thing that they don't tell you about the Edict of Milan. The Jews lost rights under the Edict of Milan. They lost rights and they lost protection. The first thing the Edict of Milan did for the Jewish people was they could no longer circumcise their servants. So they made them break Torah. Yeah. Then the Christians were forbidden to convert to Judaism. Okay? So And I can understand that. I mean, I don't approve of it, of course. I can understand why they would do that, but it also had a series of other consequences. And one of those consequences was, if you were a Christian and you still wanted to do Passover, because it was illegal for you to convert to Judaism, guess what? You would come under scrutiny. You could be persecuted or prosecuted, depending upon your point of view, just for keeping the feast, even though you still believe in Yeshua. Okay? So, if they were determined to keep doing that, then all it would take was for a couple of unruly, racist neighbors to go, they turned into Jews. They could lose their property again. And they could be excommunicated. They could be imprisoned, they could be fined, and so on. And did the Gentile Christians succumb to this pressure? No, they did not. Not all of them. So I'm telling you, I'm getting a really warm, amazing grace over here. You go, guys. Now Constantine, he's like Pharaoh, Hey, slavery didn't stop him from growing. Midwives didn't work out. Now we're going to have to be a little more direct. Okay. So Constantine changed gears, and now his third attempt is to outlaw the calculation of Easter by the rabbinic calendar for Christians. And that was done at the Council of Nicaea in 325. And this is these are Constantine's own words recorded by his own biographer, who, by the way, was there. Okay, it's not something recorded 50 years after Constantine died. This is an on-the-scene reporter. His name is Eusebius, and this is what Eusebius says Constantine said. I need a cup of coffee to get through this thing, because this is not pretty, folks, but it is history, and it's history you need to know about. The words of a Catholic saint. folks. It is resolved by the united judgment of all present that this feast ought to be kept by all and in every place on one and the same day. For what can be more becoming or honorable to us than this feast, from which we date our hopes of immortality? So this is Easter, not Pesach that he's talking about, obviously. From which we date our hopes of immortality, should be observed unfailingly by all alike according to one ascertained order and arrangement. And first of all, it appeared an unworthy thing that in celebration of this most holy feast, again, Easter, that we should follow the practice of the Jews, who have impiously defiled their hands with enormous sin, and are therefore deservedly afflicted with blindness of soul. Need a moment. For we have it in our power, Connie says, if we abandon their custom, to prolong the due observance of this ordinance to future ages by a truer order, which we have preserved from the very day of the Passion until the present time. Let us then have nothing in common with the detestable Jewish crowd. For we have received from our Savior a different way. A course at once legitimate and honorable lies open to our most holy religion. Oh, Connie. Detestable Jewish crowd, Connie? Really? Well, for those of you keeping score at home, you're dead, Mr. Emperor, and we are still here. With our Torah-observant Jewish Messiah to keep us company. Thank you very much. In any case, Connie, I think you would roll over in your grave if you knew that the true origins of your solution to this Jewish problem were more Jewish than what you than what you had. You know, to rescue Easter from the calculations of the rabbis, which, by the way, thank you for doing that. You proved the existence of the calendar that I've been researching for 25 years. Way to go, Connie. Here's what I mean. When Constantine and company came up with, what they came up with was something called the Ecclesiastical full moon. I know it sounds really puffy, doesn't it? The ecclesiastical full moon. Oh, as opposed to the rebellious pagan full moon. Okay. The ecclesiastical full moon. And the Sunday after the ecclesiastical full moon was Easter. Okay. So what is the ecclesiastical full moon that we then use it to point to Easter? Simple. The ecclesiastical full moon is defined as the full moon on or after vernal equinox. And the ecclesiastical full moon is therefore never, ever before the day of vernal equinox. Guess what, Connie? You just unearthed, in different words, the exact same method that the Hebrews, going back to Moshe, used to determine the start of the Abib new moon and Pesach 2 weeks later. Thank you. Love and defiled impious kisses, your friendly neighborhood detestable Jewish messianic believers. In other words, the rule that we have talked about, that the new moon nearest vernal equinox is always Abib or Nisan, is identical to the process for finding the Sunday after the ecclesiastical full moon. They are stating the exact method in two different ways. Because it turns out that the corollary rule is that Pesach, which is at the full moon, that full moon that is Pesach, can never ever be the day before vernal equinox. Never. Okay? Now, there are times when we've noticed this. This is kind of what happens when you're doing a calendar for year after year after year. You notice certain things, and then you research them. There have been times where the full moon will, in our modern computers, I'll just wait for that to pass. There will be times when the Pesach full moon in our modern computers comes a couple of hours before vernal equinox, but that's on the same day. It can never be, Passover can never be the day before vernal equinox. Okay, the Hebrew day. Okay? So that means that in this year, 2016, our Christian colleagues have calculated the first month of Abib correctly. They have calculated the Passover correctly, and the rabbis are out in the cold a month off. So while the original motives involved were anti-Semitic and dreadful, the end product of that anti-Semitism was one of the most pro-Jewish restoration procedures in the history of the world. Do we have an awesome Elohim or what? Okay. And now, what we're going to do is we're going to get into the first of our Torah readings. There's going to be a lot of Torah readings and Haftorah and Renewed Covenant readings, because this Pesach special is going to be complete for the entirety of the 8 days. So that means there's readings on the Torah, prophets, and Renewed Covenant on day 1, on day 2, on the Shabbat in the middle of the feast, on day 7, and on day 8. Yep. We're loaded up, folks, and ready to go. So we're going to begin with Exodus 12:21 through 51. Excuse me. And with some linguistics. And then we are going to do a short reading in Numbers, do a teeny tiny bit of linguistics, not much at all. And then we will end part 2. And I've got another bonus teaching coming up in part 3. So let's get started. Exodus 12:21 through 51, and then a little bit in Numbers. Okay? Okay. Moshe then summoned all the elders of Israel and said to them, "Go pick out lambs for your families and slaughter the Pesach offering. Take a bunch of hyssop, dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and apply some of the blood that is in the basin to the lintel and to the 2 doorposts." Mezuzah, right? "None of you shall go outside the door of his house until morning." Now this is an important detail. Who has been told that they are not going to go out until morning? The elders of Israel. Not the entire population. Because the rest of the population is going to be on the road around, say, 2 in the morning, okay? After the angel of death strikes at midnight. Anyway, what we read here is, none of you elders shall go out, basically, until morning. For when Yahweh goes through to smite the Egyptians, he will see the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts. And Yahweh will pass over the door and not let the destroyer smite your home. Now, a lot of little cool imagery just with that line that I just read, which is 12 verse 23. Okay? Pass through a bar, from where the word for Hebrew comes from. A bar, those who are from across the river. And one who crosses over from ignorance into obedience and wickedness into righteousness is a Hebrew, a bar. Pesach, also 12 verse 23, to pass over, the action of Father Yah passing over to judge Egypt, is where Pesach comes from. And that's why William Tyndale did us a great service by saying, just call it Passover. Good job, Will. And the door or opening, pathak, synonym for dalet, which means door, and the letter dalet kind of looks like a door. In Aramaic, it really looks like a door. When you have a letter D in Aramaic, it's got a dot here, okay, underneath here. So you got a door shape and a doorknob. When it's a R, you've got a head above it. Some folks like to do this little cute thing where you take Yehuda and you take the dalet or the door out of Yehuda and you got Yahweh. And some will say, well, that means it has to be Yahweh. But I will just remind all of you very briefly, you can't really use the conjugation of one verb to inform you on the pronunciation of a completely different verb or noun. That you can't do. The name for Yehuda is praise. The name for Yahweh is from Haya, to be. They are two completely different words. One does not tell you how to pronounce the other. But it is a good symbolic teaching to look at Yeshua as the door that is in Yehuda, his tribe, and that and that it becomes Yahweh. But it's just not good as a pronunciation guide for the name of the Father. Now we're also going to continue reading to verse 51. See, I told you the linguistics are really short, right? You shall observe this as an institution for all time, you and your descendants. And when you enter the land that Yahweh will give you, as he has promised you, you will observe this rite. And when your children ask you, what do you mean by this rite? You shall say, it is the Passover sacrifice of Yahweh, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians. Now, here's the thing. I mentioned this once already, that I met somebody who was convinced that the Seder was fiction. But if you look at the way Exodus 12 is reading, you can clearly see where the Haggadah gets its rituals from. Okay? And so here you have your children. How many children? Well, it becomes 4. Okay? It becomes 4 kids. And they ask each a question. So there are 4 questions. Manishtana halayla hazeh michol halelot. Right? Why is this night different from all the other nights? And each of those 4 questions is answered in Exodus 12. So when you have your children say, what do you mean by this rite? This comes into the mouth of one of the sons who says, what do you mean by these statutes and judgments and rules? Okay? And this is actually the question of the wicked son, because there's 4 different types of children. And the reason he's the wicked son is it says in the Haggadah, by saying, what do you mean, he clearly does not include himself. Okay? So you have the wise son, I think it's the wise son, the wicked son, the one who can't inquire, and the other kid. Anyway, you can clearly see how there's an interplay between these 2 things. So you shall say to your son, it is the Passover sacrifice unto Yahweh, because he passed over the houses of the Israelites in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians, but he saved our houses. The people then bowed low in homage. They bowed low in worship. Okay? And the Israelites went and did so just as Yahweh had commanded Moshe and Aaron, so they did. In the middle of the night, right? B'chatzi halayla, Yahweh struck down the firstborn in the land of Egypt. And from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night. Now this is like in the night. This text hammers this point home like half a dozen times at least, that this is happening after sunset, which means the 15th. Okay? Pharaoh sat on his throne, firstborn of captive, who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the cattle. And Pharaoh arose in the night with his courtiers and all the Egyptians, because there was a loud cry in Egypt, for there was no house where there was not someone dead. He summoned Moshe and Aaron again in the night, and said, up and depart from among my people, you and the Israelites with you, go worship Yahweh as you said. Take also your flocks and your herds as you said, and be gone. And may you bring a blessing upon me also. The Egyptians urged the people on, impatient to have them leave the country. For they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls wrapped in their cloaks upon their shoulders. The Israelites had done Moshe's bidding and borrowed from the Egyptians objects of silver, gold, and clothing. And Yahweh had disposed the Egyptians favorably toward the people, and they let them have their request. Thus they stripped the Egyptians. Right? That word for stripped, nitzal, is meant as in a very strong way, like they totally ripped them off, but that's what you get when you enslave people without just cause. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, aside from the children. Moreover, a mixed multitude went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt, and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The length of time that the Israelites had lived in Egypt was 430 years. It's actually Egypt and Canaan. We've talked about that. And in the 430th year, which is dated from when Abraham had his prophecy, in the 75th year, Genesis 15, to the very day all the ranks of Yahweh departed from the land of Egypt. That was for Yahweh a night of vigil to bring them out. There it is again, a night of vigil. Okay, for all the children of Israel throughout the ages. Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron, this is the law of the Pesach offering. No foreigner shall eat of it. Now I get this question, but any slave a man has bought may eat it once he's been circumcised. So the question I get from church folks is, hey, I'm not circumcised, not planning to get circumcised. Why are you telling me to be Torah observant when the Torah itself says I can't do Pesach? Actually, it doesn't. You see, even if you roast a lamb at your Pesach Seder, that lamb was not ritually slaughtered. It is only the lamb that is slaughtered in this exact manner, with its throat cut, with it roasting over the fire throughout the night. That lamb a Gentile cannot eat. But if you get your lamb from the supermarket and you put it in the oven, you can eat that lamb. And you can eat the matzah, and you can eat the bitter herbs, and you can eat the haroset, and you can do the entire thing. So don't tell me that you can't do it. If you're not doing it, it isn't because you're not allowed to. It's because you don't want to. Okay? No bound or hired laborer shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break a single bone of it. The whole community of Israel shall offer it. If a stranger who dwells with you would offer the Pesach unto Yahweh, all his males must be circumcised. And that's this word offer is the key to understanding this. Okay? It's not about eating a cooked lamb. It's about offering the lamb and then eating it. Again, through ritual sacrifice. But no uncircumcised person may eat of it. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you, and all the Israelites did so as Yahweh had commanded Moshe and Aaron, so they did. That very day Yahweh freed the Israelites from the land of Egypt, troop by troop. And our last little piece for this part, a little bit of Numbers. Numbers chapter 28. I'm going to read right now. Comment on. Numbers 28. Okay, 31, 30. Here we are. We'll be reading from 28:16 through verse 25. As follows. Okay. In the first month, on the 14th of the month, there shall be a Passover sacrifice unto Yahweh. Right? And on the 15th day of that month, a festival. Unleavened bread shall be eaten for 7 days. The first day shall be a sacred occasion. You shall not do work at your occupation. So I got one little itty-bitty note for this. Malaka Avodah, regular work, servant work, which excludes the ban of the preparation of food. You have to prepare food for Pesach. Contrast this with the other type of malaka that bans all manner of work, including food prep, like on Yom Kippur, because you don't need food when you're fasting. Okay, so continuing here. All right, verse 19. You shall present an offering by fire, a burnt offering unto Yahweh, 2 bulls of the herd, 1 ram, and 7 yearling lambs. See that they are without blemish. Right? The meal offering with them shall be of choice flour with oil mixed in. Prepare 3/10 of a measure for a bull, 2/10 for a ram, and for each of the 7 lambs prepare 1/10 of a measure. And there shall be 1 goat for a sin offering, to make expiation in your behalf. You shall present these in addition to the morning portion of the regular burnt offering. You shall offer the like daily for 7 days as food and offering of fire by pleasing aroma unto Yahweh. They shall be offered with their libations in addition to the regular burnt offering. And on the 7th day shall be a sacred occasion for you. You will not work at your occupations. So this is now the end of part 2. And coming up, we've got another bonus teaching in part 3 and more readings to come, obviously, because we just got started. It's called The Calendar Secrets of Joshua 4, which I think has got a real interesting twist on the story of Joshua. And we'll get into that starting in part 3. Okay? So that's where we're at, and I will see you momentarily. Take care.